All right, Alexander, let's talk about the summit in Geneva between Biden and Putin. We have the agenda, and they will be discussing the coup. They will be discussing Ukraine. They'll be discussing those hackers, those Russian hackers, climate change, okay, and the situation in the Middle East, which I imagine will essentially be Syria. What do you make of this agenda?
The only part of that agenda that is real is Ukraine. The Russians have made it very clear they want to see something happen over Ukraine. And as far as they're concerned, unless that happens, there's not going to be any real improvement in relations between them and the United States. But all the rest, the coup, the climate change, all of these things, as far as the Russians are concerned, these are peripheral issues. They're not really very concerned to discuss them directly with the US president. They want to talk about Ukraine. They'd like to talk about a cyberspace treaty, but of course the United States has ruled that out. They would like to see some move towards strategic arms limitation, but again, they want to do that on the basis of equality with the US, which the US is not happy to do. And in reality, it will not be these issues that are going to be discussed in this summit meeting. What we're going to get instead, and this is what I predict, because it's not just a prediction, it's also what we discussed in a previous video, but it's also been confirmed by US officials who've spoken to Washington Examiner. What's really going to happen is the US is going to make all kinds of threats to the Russians about all kinds of things and transgressions that the Russians are committing, real or alleged, and they're going to say, well, if you break away from China, we'll give you lots of money through this new slush fund which we've created, which is our great infrastructure fund. That's what it's really about. So, you know, climate change, the pandemic, the Russians will shrug their shoulders. They may say a few things that, you know, might seem sort of friendly. There could conceivably be an announcement about discussions on strategic weapons, but the real discussions, the real issues that are going to be talked about, to the extent they're going to be talked about, are going to come in the private sessions when, as I said, the Americans will be making their real pitch to the Russians to get them to break with the Chinese, which will get nowhere at all.
All right. So why are they having these meetings? Because I definitely know the Russians know that nothing's going to come out of these.
Absolutely.
I would imagine, you know, outside of the Biden circle of people, there are American diplomats who also know that nothing's going to come out of these meetings. Even this kind of strong arm tactic is not going to work, and I think there are American diplomats that understand that as well. So why are they going ahead with this? Is perhaps the end game here a PR and media thing, just kind of to present Biden in a certain light against Putin? And are the Russians just kind of doing this to maybe go through the motions, get a feel for this this administration? I mean, just kind of, you know, like what the Chinese did with Blinken, you know, take the meeting, get a feel for these guys, and just kind of get a better understanding as to who they're dealing with in the next 3 years. I mean, they know nothing's going to come out of this. So what do you think are the real? What do you think is going to be the real takeaway from all of this and the real reasons to go through these motions?
Right. I mean, first of all, the two things that you said are absolutely valid, and they're undoubtedly true. The Russians do want to get a sense of what kind of administration they're dealing with. Not so much Biden himself, who they sort of know, but all the sort of secondary people like Lloyd Austin, people like Blinken, who I presume will be there, those sort of people. They want to get a feel for that. But and in terms of the US, undoubtedly, there is the appearance of the strong leader taking on, you know, the evil emperor. I mean, this all plays well in the media, at least among some people. So, you know, Luke Skywalker versus, you know, Darth Sidious or whatever it is. I mean, this is that. There is some element of that, and I think we can take that perhaps rather humorously, but you know, we shouldn't overlook that. But I think that so far as the Russians are concerned, what they're basically doing is they're stringing the Americans along. They've got Nord Stream 2 out of the way. They've managed to create problems, issues between the US and Ukraine. They've undermined the position of the Greens in Germany, because the Greens were going to be the very strong anti-Russian party, but the wind has gone out of their sails, because at the moment we're talking about rapprochement and all of that. So for the time being, the Russians it's in their interest to string this thing along for a little, to give themselves a little bit more time to finish Nord Stream 2, to complete their work on preparing themselves for when the sanctions start being ramped up again. They're just buying themselves a little time that way, as well as getting to know what kind of administration they're dealing with. On the American side, I think there are some people, obviously not everyone, but I think there are some people who are genuinely deluded enough to believe that if they threaten Putin enough and bribe him enough, he will break relations with the Chinese. I mean, I think that there are some people who genuinely think that. The Russians have been going out of their way to say that's not going to happen. Putin made that very clear in his rather extraordinary TV interview with NBC, which is one of the most bizarre interviews I've ever seen, but that's another story. And of course, the Russian ambassador to China has also been saying much the same thing in various interviews he's been giving to the Chinese media. So they're not going to see the Russian-Chinese alliance cracked, but I think there are some people in America or the US who are deluded enough to think that it can be done. And I think those people still have those sort of hopes.
Do you think there are going to be any fireworks, any major gaffes from Biden during this this meeting? I suspect there won't be, because they're going to be doing the solo press conferences. They won't be together, and I imagine everything's going to be very well managed, especially on the Biden White House side of things. My prediction for this would be that when this summit is over, that's when the media is going to really ramp up the propaganda and the attack, one on Putin and Russia, and they're going to ramp up the propaganda to build up Biden. I mean, they're going to really just picture Biden. Yeah, they're going to make Biden look like, you know, the strongest, most capable president since I don't even know, Theodore Roosevelt. They're
going to build him up enormously. You're going to see an enormous campaign over the next few weeks, projecting, Joe Biden as the Jedi Knight who took on the evil emperor. I mean, the Obi-Wan Kenobi figure, that sort of thing. I mean, be prepared for it. This is going to be a triumph for Biden. This is how it's going to be spun. It's going to have no basis in reality. I mean, that's going to have no real connection to what we're going to see. But you're absolutely right. The media are going to play that story for all it's worth until everything begins to look otherwise, which it will. I mean, you can create narratives and fantasies for as long as you like, but ultimately reality overwhelms you, and sooner or later it will.
Yeah, but we're not going to see any China, Blinken, Alaska moments. I mean, that's not the way the Russian diplomats operate. They're not going to openly embarrass
they're not.
Joe Biden or his team or Blinken.
No, they're not going to do that, because they're not in that position. I mean, the Chinese could afford to do that in Alaska, because they're brimming with self-confidence. They've got an economy which, by some measures now, is bigger than that of the US. They feel the tide of history is on their side. Russia is not in that position. I mean, to say it straightforward, it's a much weaker position than China is, and they will not want to create a situation with the Americans which could backfire on them. So they will, as I said, they won't do that. What they will do is they will string the Americans along. They will say to the Americans, well, if you want to talk about hacking, let's talk about hacking. If you want to talk about strategic arms, let's talk about strategic arms. Let's agree to have further meetings. Let's see what can be done about this and that. But of course, it will all be done without any real intention or conviction, because in reality, even as the Americans might come away from this summit saying to themselves, well, perhaps something was achieved, in practice and in reality, the Russians will be working hard to shore up their defences, and expect a visit in July by Putin to Beijing.
All right. So the final question and comment is this. When the summit is over, the media is going to attack Russia. They're going to absolutely attack and character assassinate Putin. That's a given. During the NBC interview, I saw Putin that really doesn't give a crap. I mean, he told that journalist, if you could even call that guy a journalist, because I thought the questions he was asking were absolutely dreadful and shameful. Actually, he was awful, this guy. But anyway, Putin pretty much made the point to the guy, and he said it over and over again. I am the president of Russia. I look after Russia. I look after Russian interests and the Russian people. He said it over and over again. It reminded me of something that Trump would say. I'm the president of the United States. I look after the American people, and I look after their interests. So Putin was just hammering that message home to this guy. That journalist was just thick in the head, and he couldn't understand it. He really could not understand it. That Vladimir Putin's job is to be president of Russia, not president of America, not president of France, not president of Italy. He is president of Russia. So do you think that they're going to the Russians really care what's going to happen after the summit, which we know is going to be a ramp up in, Russia did this, Russia did that, Putin's evil, Putin's this, Putin's a killer, Putin's that, so on and so forth. But they're gonna maybe amplify it times 100.
Yes, and the answer is they don't care. I mean, it's important to stress, wasn't the Russians who suggested this summit meeting. They didn't expect it. They didn't ask for it. It was sprung on them out of nowhere at a time of crisis when it was quite clear that they were in a strong position and the US is in a weak one. As I said, it is in their interest at the moment to string things along a little. But I think they know perfectly well that can only work for a few months, perhaps a year at most. I'd be very surprised, actually, if it was as much as a year. But if things go otherwise, if instead the Americans and the media and ramp up their attacks on Russia, become ever more critical and abusive about Russia, take ever more aggressive actions against Russia, well, the Russians will shrug their shoulders and they'll say, well, at the end of the day, we just carry on doing what we've always done, which is we build up our own, positions. We're now ready to cope with a disconnection from SWIFT, which they know is coming. We've got our changes that we're making to our National Welfare Fund. We're phasing out the dollar. We are forging ahead with our closer relations with our new ally, which is China. And at the end of the day, that's what we'll do. And if the Americans can rage and say all sorts of horrid things about us, and about our president, and about our country, and about our policies, well, so be it. We will carry on as we have. Now, there's been a major shift in Russian foreign policy and Russian language over the course of this year. It really started with Josep Borrell's visit to Moscow in February, which is that nowadays the Russians push back. I mean, previously, they used to be very quiet, very reticent. They would take anything that was thrown at them, and they would be very accommodating. If you remember, Putin always used to talk about the US as his partners, which, by the way, was very grating to many people in Russia too. Well, they've stopped doing that anymore. Now they have become very willing. If the Americans, expel someone, they will expel someone back. If the Americans arrest a Russian, they will arrest an American. If the Americans impose sanctions on Russia, well, the Russians will reciprocate with whatever measures they think. They're no longer in a position where they feel the need to be appeasing of the Americans anymore. They feel that their cards have got stronger and that the Americans' cards have got weaker, and they look at the state of Europe and they think that this is just a ridiculous affair, Europe now, and they want to have as little to do with this as possible.
All right, a little off topic, but still related. The NBC interview, the journalist, and I say that once again, the journalist harped on the narrative, which is just getting so old, of the people that Russian President Vladimir Putin has had assassinated. And you may want to get into some of those names. Putin, of course, laughed it off. He called it verbal indigestion. And rightly so, because You know, it's getting so old at this point, but they're still sticking with that. Literally a day later, we get the news that Christopher Stein, the person that broke the Loretta Lynch, Bill Clinton tarmac story, which a few days later led to James Comey watering down, FBI Director James Comey, watering down many of the would-be charges against Hillary Clinton and her email server. He had supposedly, allegedly, committed suicide. Once again, we go back to I don't know if you can call it hypocrisy or irony, but here you have one NBC journalist bringing up 5 people in 20 years that have, and I'll use Putin's words, perished for different reasons, and trying to pin them on the Russian president. And literally a day later, you have an ABC journalist, and I believe he is an ABC journalist, perishing. And he is one of many, a long list of very young, and I want to stress that, very young, very successful, very put together people who have somehow met an early fate that were connected in one way or another with the Clinton machine. And I'm not going to go any further than saying that, but the hypocrisy, the irony of it all, what do you make of that narrative?
Well, I'm glad you raised this, because I'm going to say, first of all, let's just talk about those 5 names. I mean, 2 of them, Mikhail Lezin was one of Putin's loyal subordinates, as Putin pointed out. Why would Putin want to have him killed? And he died in New York, in a hotel room in New York, and the New York authorities, the police and the
New York or DC?
DC. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
It was DC.
Right.
It was DC. He died in DC, and the authorities there investigated the death, and they decided that there was no foul play. So why go behind that? Why assume that this person, who, by the way, was instrumental in setting up RT, was killed by Putin? Now, the other person who's mentioned, one of the other people who's mentioned, is Sergei Magnitsky, and it has never been suggested that it was Putin himself who ordered Magnitsky's death. Never. No one has even, not even Bill Browder, to my knowledge, has ever suggested that. So what is he doing in a list like that anyway? Now, I don't want to imply that I think that the other 3 people, Nemtsov, Litvinenko, and I can't remember the 5th, Politkovskaya.
But the journalist.
The journalists were killed by Putin. But, I mean, I don't want to suggest that. But in 2 cases, Lezin and Magnitsky, we know that they were not. So already that list looks ridiculous. But I'm very glad that you raised this about these people who've died in the United States. Now, I want to make it very clear. I'm not making any allegations. I'm not making any accusations against anybody. The fact is, if those people had died in similar circumstances in Russia, the Western media would be saying that Putin was behind their deaths. It would. I know of many cases like this. I know of journalists who jumped out of windows in Russia and committed suicide, and it's always claimed, invariably claimed, that this was something that was done as a result of foul play, that the FSB did it because, Putin wants to eliminate journalists and that sort of thing. But, similar things like that happening in the United States, and I again stress, I am not making any accusations. I don't make accusations without reason or cause, but similar things happen in the United States, and it is assumed, it is invariably said that there's no reason to be to look behind it. Let's accept it as entirely an innocent event, a tragic event, which tragic, of course, it always is. So this is the kind of way they play narratives. Deaths like that in Russia are suspicious and point to Putin. Deaths like that in America point to no one at all, even though there might be connections there, which if you wanted to follow them up and looked into, well, perhaps conceivably they might lead somewhere. I'm not saying they do mind. So, it's a good example. This business about journalists dying in Russia, by the way, is not just stale. It belongs to a time that has completely passed. There was a time in the 1990s when before Putin became president, when lots of people used to die for all kinds of reasons because the country had basically disintegrated. And then there was a war in the Caucasus when, again, a lot of people died for all sorts of reasons. But now the death rates of journalists in Russia are about the same, as I understand it, as they are in the US. But you won't hear anybody say that.
Yeah, exactly right. Turkey, they have thousands. Duran has thousands
of
journalists who are in prison. It's not, and just in Greece, and just so I can be fair, just in Greece, literally about a month and a half ago, a journalist was gunned down right outside his home. I don't know what the reasons were, what the investigation concluded, but it happens.
Absolutely, it happens. It happens. Things like this do happen. And as I said, let's not throw around allegations against people like Putin when we have no real reason to. I mean, and by the way, your overall assessment of that interview is absolutely spot on. And of course, it all began in the most grotesque way in which this journalist was bringing up this completely fake news story about the Russians selling a satellite to Iran so that Iran can track American warships and American bases and all of that. And Putin tells him, look, I know nothing about this. This is completely not true. And the journalist continues with that story. And Putin comes back and says to him, why are we wasting time talking about something that's completely phony, that's completely fake news? I mean, this wasn't an interview. It was a bizarre attempt by somebody who's no sort of journalist, in my opinion, to try to put Putin on the spot, and failing miserably.
Yeah, and just a final note, you know how the Russians use it? They take that material and they show it to the Russian citizens on their TV, exactly. And they overdub it or put their subtitles, and they say, look, this is how they see us.
Exactly.
And it just hardens the opinion of the Russian people against the West and the United States and
exactly.
The media in the US.
That is exactly what they do. And they also, by the way, have lots of call-in programs in which they have guests from the West, and they always choose hardline neocons because they know perfectly, well, this is very common. It's a standard Russian policy, so that Russian audiences see how neocons talk about their country. And that plays directly into the Russian attempt to educate their people about what the West thinks about them.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave it there, guys. Look for us on BitChute, on Odyssey, Super U, and go to our locals page and go to the Duran shop. 10% off when you use the code REALNEWS. All the links are down below. Take care.